After years of seeing a lot of writers focus on the wrong things in their novel, I came up with a rule that I think will help writers revolutionize their novel. It's show the wound, not the knife. And here's what I mean by that. Instead of showing a very graphic car accident, show the character months later still wincing when there's a loud noise. Instead of showing a really heated argument between a married couple, show the silence the next morning as they both get their coffee. Instead of showing a violent confrontation, show the black eye the next day. Basically, the aftermath of the event is just as important, if not more important, than the original event itself. You think I'm making this up, but I am dead serious. I am going to show you 9 examples of books and movies where what they leave off screen ends up strengthening their story. So let's look at the very first thing that you might want to leave off screen in your book, and it is number 1, world-building backstory. Normally, when you have a post-apocalyptic story, you want to show the origin of that apocalypse, right? I mean, that's everyone's first question is like, how did we get here? What happened to make the Earth this way? But Cormac McCarthy, in his novel The Road, really declines to tell us what exactly happened before this father and son started on this journey. The knife, essentially what started the apocalypse, really isn't explained in any great detail. And then the wound, which is them trying to survive in this hellscape, that is what McCarthy thinks deserves the entire focus of the novel. Now, if you do this, if you try this in your own novel, I have a very important piece of advice. You absolutely must hint at what caused the apocalypse. Otherwise, readers are going to be extremely angry with you and throw your book across the room if you don't give them some sort of sense, some sort of way that they can guess what happened. And McCarthy does this in his novel. He hints that there's some sort of concussive flash, and so we think like, okay, maybe this is a nuclear disaster. But he certainly never confirms that guess of the reader. Now, also, if you try this in your book, you don't want to make it into a mystery, because making it into a mystery will make the reader think like, oh, they're going to tell me later on in the novel, and then they'll be disappointed if you never tell them. So just state it as matter of fact. Just go forward from the present like this is the world that we live in, and they'll be fine with it. And hey, I am starting up a new coaching program for writers. It's called BookFox LAB, and it has 3 parts to it. There's some methodical craft instruction, which will be presented live and help writers write the best version of their books. There is one-on-one coaching, and I brought in a team of coaches who are either New York Times bestselling authors or people who have coached New York Times bestselling authors. And lastly, and this is probably the most important, is you will get weekly feedback on your writing to help you level up and help you really write the book you want to write. You can learn more on my website. The link is in the description, but hurry because the very first one starts pretty soon and already half the spots have been filled. So get in while the getting is good. The second thing that you might want to leave off screen in your book, and it might end up helping your book a great deal, is graphic violence. So in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, I don't know whether you remember the battle at the end, the Battle of the Five Armies, but there's not that much description of it because Bilbo hits his head and is unconscious for most of the battle and then wakes up afterwards. Now, in the movie, they don't do that, right? They show the battle in all of its splendid glory, and it's very, very, very lengthy. But the reason that Tolkien left that out of the book is because he didn't want to glorify war. He didn't want to make war into entertainment, because remember, he had come back from World War I and knew a lot of friends who had come back from that, and he knew the horrors firsthand. A second example would be in The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. There is a scene of horrific violence inside an alleyway. That's really the core event in the entire book. But the book really doesn't show it, because look at this excerpt. The narrator doesn't want to watch. He doesn't want to see it happen, and so he looks away. And so it focuses on his reaction rather than what's actually going on. So you definitely can leave out a scene of graphic violence in your book, and it might be the right decision for your novel, but you need some sort of philosophy like Tolkien, or you need some sort of psychological reason like Hosseini did in order to leave it out and for it to make sense in your book. Now, I almost left this next point out of the video because it's probably the most dangerous point I'm gonna give, but I have to keep it in and just give, some qualifications and exceptions. It is number 3, climactic moments. Now, you're probably saying to me like, John, it's the climax. How could you possibly leave that out of a book? Okay, but sometimes it happens. Let me give you an example. So let's go back to Cormac McCarthy and look at No Country for Old Men, where one of the very main characters in the whole novel, Llewellyn, his death appears off screen. We don't get to see it. It doesn't happen in the pages. We expect there'd be a showdown between him and the main villain Anton. Instead, Llewellyn gets killed by some sort of minor characters and it's sort of shoveled off screen. So why did Cormac do this? And how does this actually work? Well, one, he wanted to show the senseless and arbitrary and non-discriminating nature of violence. It just affects everyone. And then two, Cormac found the aftermath of the death, right? Not the knife, but the wound, the aftermath of the death, with the sheriff trying to process the very nature of evil, he found that to be much more interesting than the actual murder. The fourth thing that you might want to leave out of your book, and your book will be better because of it, is character backstory. Let's look at The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway. So what's left out is Jake Barnes's war injury. We don't get the backstory of how it happened. We don't even really know what it even is. In this case, the actual knife and wound are literal knives and wounds. But I think by not specifying what his wound is, Hemingway ends up making his wound very universal. He represents all the soldiers who are coming back being wounded. And I also think Hemingway's doing characterization work by leaving that backstory out, because Jake Barnes is the sort of, strong, silent, masculine type who wouldn't dwell on the past. No, he would focus on the present. And by not focusing on the knife, the actual moment when he got injured, it gives Hemingway a lot more time to focus on, okay, how does Jake Barnes live with this war injury? How does it affect him? His relationship struggles, his pain, his isolation. So if you're trying to do this in your own novel, recognize the power of alluding to things that happened in the past of your character, but not feeling the need to go into enormous detail about what exactly happened and make it into a scene and tell that whole storyline. No, your story is in the present with whatever's happening right now, and they're just affected by that past. Now, this next point is so delicious. I am proud of myself for coming up with it. It is number 5, self-incriminating material. So if you are writing a first-person POV, or if you are writing a story with any kind of diary or written work in it, ooh, I got a good technique for you. The person who is telling the story, or the person who is writing the story, if you have a diary or journal or something, should leave out self-incriminating evidence. This is such a cool thing, and I'll give you 2 examples of where it happens. First, let's look at Diary of a Country Priest by Georgia Barnanus. So this is a priest who is writing his diary, and there's some question about whether he's a little too friendly with the ladies. So halfway through the book, there are pages that are torn out of the diary, and we're like, ooh, what did he write in those pages? It's a mystery. We don't know whether he confessed to something. We don't know whether he talked about a little dalliance or whatnot. It's a mystery. This technique also comes into play in Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner. In some places of the book, there's a diary written by Susan, but at the very moment where we wonder, oh, did she commit adultery? Those pages of the diary are torn out. They're missing from the book. So the reader's like, okay, what did she write about? What happened during those weeks when she would have written it? But once again, why this works is what matters is not the knife. That's not the most exciting part, but really it's the wound. What happens after that initial event? How do they act? What psychologically is going on? Now, the next thing you really should consider whether you want to keep it in or keep it out of your novel. It is number 6, spicy details. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why you might want to keep a romantic scene in your book. Maybe it helps develop the character's psychology. Maybe it forwards the plot in some way. And I've talked about a lot of these reasons inside my book, The Linchpin Writer. I have a whole chapter devoted to that. But in this lesson, we're going to talk about what are some reasons why you would want to leave it out, and why is that a good decision. So if you bring 2 characters to the point where they're ready to become intimate physically, you might just want to cut to black. You might just want to have it happen off screen. You might want to have the bedroom door close. And you know what? Sometimes not showing it actually is more sensual than showing it. And for an example of this, let's look at Anaïs Nin and her book Delta of Venus. So at the end of this book, there's a jazz band and they announce a very special dance where for 5 minutes they're going to turn off all the lights. Then there's a break. Then there's going to be 10 minutes they're going to turn off all the lights. And then 15 minutes while they turn off all the lights. And people keep dancing throughout this. This leaves everything to the reader's imagination. She doesn't actually describe what's happening in the dark. All we can hear are sounds, and once the lights come back and we see people's flushed faces and sweaty bodies, and we're like, oh, stuff went down. She doesn't show you, she lets your imagination do the work, and that's incredibly powerful. And if any of you write romance or genres where you have romantic storylines, you know this, right? The anticipation of what's going to happen, or the stuff that's off screen, is often just as important as the climactic event where it's actually the consummation. But in Anani's Nin, we are seeing the aftermath of what people look like after that period in the dark, and it's so much more powerful. This next point is a little bit silly, but I do think it's very helpful for writers. It's number 7, connective tissue. So sometimes you have 2 scenes, but there's one scene that needs to happen in between those scenes. That's the connective tissue. And sometimes you need to leave that out of your book. You need not to write it, you need to drop it. And for an example of this, let's look at a movie actually, Big Lebowski. So we have 3 scenes, a scene where they're destroying a man's car and then the man destroys their car. We have a scene where they go to In-N-Out and get burgers because that's what they've been talking about for a while. And then we have a scene where they're driving home from In-N-Out, eating burgers in their busted up car. Now, in the film, we see both the knife and the wound. The knife is when their car gets destroyed, and the wound is when they're driving home with a busted car. What we don't see is the in-between. We don't see them going to In-N-Out, ordering their food, none of that. That scene is cut entirely. And the story is so much stronger because it jumps right from wrecking the car to them eating In-N-Out burgers in a busted up car. So obviously what you put into your book and what you leave out of your book is essential to the whole nature of who you are as a storyteller and how your story works. So once again, this is not some sort of like random technique I'm giving that you might find useful. No. This is the essence of how you become a writer, knowing what to put on the page, knowing what to leave off the page. We got 2 more points left. They are super important. Let us start with number 8, the rest of the story. There was a radio host called Paul Harvey, and he used to do these shows where he would tell a story and then he'd be like, but here is the rest of the story, and there'd be a big twist. For instance, there was this one story where this guy had like 15 failed businesses. Everything he did was a disaster. And then he started up KFC and was like obviously a wild, huge success. Well, in your fiction, sometimes there is the rest of the story, but that's a part of the story you should actually leave out. And for an example of this, let's look at Out of Season by Ernest Hemingway. So there was an ending to that story, but then Hemingway said later, like, the actual ending was one I didn't even include. The actual ending was the main character, he hung himself. Now, he knew that's what happened in that character's future, and so he wrote the story with that knowledge, and it made that story stronger. But then he decided, no, you know what, that's too dark of an ending for the story. I don't think it actually works to put it in. But if I leave it out and end a little bit before that, the story will be perfect. In your story, there's all sorts of things that you might know about that happens later on. And maybe you save those for a sequel, or maybe you just say, my story is stronger without me putting in everything I know about the story. Sometimes you end where you end because it's the right emotional place to end, and it would be ruined if you kept on going with it. And lastly, let's get to point number 9, keep the earthy realities off screen. So by earthy realities, I'm talking about your characters peeing and pooping, right? Like very physical things that they have to do that we all have to do. Now, I know there's lots of exceptions out there. Think of like Mo Yan, the Chinese writer who won the Nobel. He writes very earthy stuff. Or think of a writer like Francois Rabelais, who writes all sorts of, earthy humor, like fart jokes and pee and poop jokes. But most of the time, you probably want to leave this out of your fiction. I mean, in Lord of the Rings, you don't see the hobbits taking a bathroom break, do you? No, it's just not that type of story. But then there is something like The Hunger Games where you have Katniss, where she does mention offhand, oh, like my pee's really dark brown. But the reason why this works is because it fits into the story. Like, we learn, oh, she is severely dehydrated if it's coming out brown. And also I will say that we don't actually see it, right? We're told about it later. So once again, not the actual event, we're seeing the aftermath, not the knife, but the actual wound. Hey, just a reminder to check out Bookfox Lab if you haven't already done that. You want to get in on this. It is going to be a fantastic training grounds to help writers get to the next level. Click on that link in the description and happy writing.